If you're going to go see the observation tower in Shark Valley, it's 7 miles out one way, and the tram doesn't go past 2 o'clock. So you just got to remember that. You're not going to be able to walk it. You could rent a bike, but it's an hour bike ride one way. So think about that before you go out and try to hit the observation tower with not enough time left in the day. But let's get on with the rest of this. One more early tip before we actually get into this. If the National Park Ranger says that you might need boots or waterproof shoes, means you probably do. I was out taking sunset photos in a marsh, and I was trying to get the trees of the big cypress park, but I took a few wrong steps and basically stepped ankle deep in the mud with my shoes and got my feet totally soaking wet with muddy water. So long story short, if a ranger says that you might want boots or gaiters to go to a certain area, you actually do need them. But let's get on with this. The Everglades National Park, America's wetlands. Before we actually dive straight into the park, I'm going to start with a few tips that would be good to know before you actually even get into the park to begin with. So one of the first ones on the list is sunscreen and a hat. You're still in Florida, the sun is still really strong, it's hot out. You're going to want sun protection, especially sunscreen if your skin is really sensitive to the sun, and a hat just to keep the sun off your face so you don't feel like you're overheating throughout the day. Getting into the park requires a park pass. Now you can get one at the front gate entrance, or you can order an online one and just have it on your phone, so you just flash them your phone before you go in. For 7 days for one car, it costs about $30. So that's not really that bad. If you're there for 7 days, it's almost a steal at that point. But $30 to enter a national park is kind of on the cheap side, even if you're only there for a day or two. At the entrance, they'll hand you a map, which basically shows you the entire layout of the national park and the areas around it. And this is really good to kind of look at before you go, so you can figure out where every place is that you want to go. But I wanted to do you guys a solid, and I recorded driving all the way into the bottom of the park and kind of mapping everything out so that you can understand how far each location is. So let's just go over that real quickly. So from the entrance of the park, the first thing that you'll probably want to stop at is Royal Palm, and this is where you'll find the Anhinga Trail. It is 4 miles down the road and only 6 minutes away from the entrance. Now continuing down the road, 6.5 miles from the entrance, it's only 9 minutes away, it's the Pinelands area. So this is where you're going to find these huge tall pine trees. There's a small little loop you can walk around, or you can take the 6.5 mile one-way hike that goes through more pines. But I'd recommend just a small loop if you just want to get a small taste of what the area looks like. So 13 miles away, which is just 20 minutes on the road, is the entrance to the Pahayokee Overlook. I'll talk about this later in the video. This is a pretty special spot, which we'll dive into in a little bit more deeper context. 20 miles down the road, you'll find the entrance to the Mahogany Hammock. It's 27 minutes away, so about half an hour ride from the entrance. Then you'll eventually hit West Lake, which is 31 miles down the road, 34 minutes from the entrance. Unfortunately, this was closed when I was visiting, so I couldn't go see it, which is kind of a downer because it's one of the bigger lakes in the entrance that you can see by foot. So finally at the end, 38 miles from the entrance and a 45-minute drive away is the area of Flamingo. You'll find a ranger station here, you'll find a bunch of camping grounds, you'll find an awesome prairie hike, which I'll get into. And this is also just like a perfect hangout spot, to be honest. You can rent kayaks, you can get some ice cream, you can just kind of hang out in the area. And the campground is actually trying to build this up. The national park, it seems to be investing more money into actually building more of an indoor residency. There's a hotel that's under construction that overlooks the water right at the end. The park is putting more money into this area to hopefully engage more tourism, because it's actually a pretty cool park, and I think they're trying to build on that going forward. And then for those of you with heavy foots, the speed limit in the park is 55 miles per hour. There are a few parts where it slows down to 45 or 35, depending on how much traffic there is in the area typically. But if you're going 55 miles per hour, it only takes 40 to 50 minutes to get from the entrance to the end at Flamingo. Another thing you might be looking into even before you look into how you actually get into the park is where you're going to be staying. So you can reserve a campground spot if you enjoy camping, but because Hurricane Irma destroyed a lot of the camping ground areas, you have to reserve a camping spot way in advance. But if you don't want to camp on the ground, you can either find a cheap hotel. There are some hostels I've seen signs for, but a cheap hotel in Homestead or Florida City is about $50 to $65 roughly for a king-size bed in your own room. So if you can find someone else to split that with for $30 a night, that's almost the equivalent of a hostel abroad. 2 people to a room is actually perfect. But if you want to splurge, there are some nicer hotels in the area too. Or you could even stay in Miami and drive the extra hour to the national park if you just want to stay in a more luxurious area than the small towns of Homestead. Alright, so the first in the park that I want to give you guys is to have a game plan for what you're going to do. Everglades National Park has a lot of destinations and hiking trails to go check out, so it's good to know which ones you want to go see before you just go straight into the park. So I'm all the way at the bottom in Flamingo. It's about a 38 to 40 mile drive all the way to the bottom. I'm going to work my way back throughout the day. Or I could have started at the front and then worked my way in. It's just going to come on down to what you want to see in the afternoon and what you want to see as the day progresses. So that being said, let's move on to tip number 2. Another good thing to remember is to take your headphones out and always be kind of looking around, because you're trying to find all the animals that the Everglades has to offer. Now, you're going to find the gators every now and then, but there's so many other different kinds of animals in the park that they might get scared if they hear you coming, or you might not be able to hear them if you have music playing. So a good thing to remember is to just make sure you're paying attention to everything around you and that you're constantly on the lookout for something cool you might be able to find. Alright, I can't stress this tip enough. You need the essential oil, and that oil is bug spray. Because we all know about mosquitoes and swamps, and Everglades is just a giant swamp, so you're going to get bit by mosquitoes. But the other bug I want to talk about, I swear they're demon spawn. They're these tiny flies. They're not no-see-ums, but they're like the size of horse flies, but a bit bigger. And at first you see a few during the day and you're like, whatever, these aren't doing anything. But then around sunset, around like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, they just come out in swarms and they bite non-stop, and their bites hurt. They're not like a mosquito bite where you can tolerate it and you can just kind of be outside for a few minutes and kind of just deal with the situation. I couldn't last 10 seconds with these flies biting me. So you want to make sure you get some good heavy duty bug spray. And to know that you're working with some good stuff, you want a lot of DEET. So this insect repellent Sportsman Max has 40% DEET. Now it's going to be thick. It's not going to feel great walking around with this thick oil on your skin, but it's better to be greasy and oily than being eaten alive by bugs. All right, now to talk about the other aspect of a national park, the animals. So there are a ton of animals in the national park. Basically an insane amount of different birds. You see them flying all over the place, but there are some on the ground you do need to be aware of that live here. I'm talking about your gators, your snakes, and the occasional panther that you might come across. Now, the likelihood of actually coming across one of the Florida panthers is very, very low, but they are out here. What you will find are the gators, and typically if you stay out of their way, they'll leave you alone. But if you do have small children with you, just be cautious. If you can pick it up, a gator can pull it down. But you probably won't have to deal with it if you stay on the path. So I'm going to segue into another tip is stay on the path. Think of it this way. If you don't want them in your home, they don't want you in their home. So if there's a designated path, a boardwalk, do your best to stay on it. Don't wander off. But if you do, be smart about it. Don't step into areas without looking. There could be a snake hiding. There could be an alligator lurking nearby. You don't want to lose a leg or get a really bad bite. Just keep in mind, stay on the trail. Back to Flamingo. Now to just tell you about the area. So the Flamingo area is kind of like this large flatland, at least for the first mile in. You're you're gonna have a lot of this long plain with these little, I don't know, it looks like grass, but it's not grass. It's like little bushes kind of meshed together. And they're gonna have these dead trees popping up everywhere. But if you take the loop road along to the coast, you're basically gonna be walking around with patches of mangroves with little beach openings in between. Those are cool to check out and take some awesome photos. And then at the end of the loop road, so it's the second fork, right now there seems to be an osprey nest all the way out here. So I'm gonna go try to get a few closer photos of that. But this area, right off the bat, seems to be the dream of any kind of photographer who thinks themselves as a minimalist. A minimalist. That's the word I'm looking for. It's just flat, open, and there's almost nothing around it. So the few things you can get in your foreground for your image look awesome. One quick side note about that trail in Flamingo. The way you find it is at the very end of the campground, right after where the old Lot C campground used to end. It's the right last curve of the actual loop. So if you're going too fast, you will miss it because the sign is actually parallel to the road. So it won't be sticking out. But the way you find it, there's going to be these two paved little parking spots that look like they're old campsites. And there's going to be a large tree across from the entrance of this trail. So on the left side will be the paved spots and the tree, and on the right side will be the entrance to the trail. So what you need to know for the Mahogany Hammock is that it's basically a short little boardwalk about half a mile long that loops around a bunch of mahogany trees. Now to the average person, this just looks like a regular forest boardwalk, but to the nature lover, there's a ton of different trees and plant specimens all around this area. And the hidden gem is that if you're lucky enough, you can find some of the owls that like to call this place home. I've done 2 laps. I have not been able to find one yet. It might be because of the time of day or time of year. So I'm going to do some more in-trip research and try to get back to you guys on that to kind of help you figure out if this area is worth it for you. Update on the owl situation. So I went home, did some research, was looking up how do you find the owls here. Then looking at the photos, I was like, why does it look like they were hit by a flash? And then it hit me. I forgot that owls are nocturnal. So looking around for them at 2 in the afternoon wasn't going to work anyway. So I was shooting sunset around Mahogany Hammock again tonight. And I said, you know what? I don't have a flash, but maybe I could find one during late into blue hour. So I came back and did a loop or 2 and realized that it's going to get too dark. I don't know where to look to find them, but I swear I heard 2 whoos. So I know they're in there, or at least one is, but it's going to get so dark in there that I'm not going to be able to find it. So for those of you into owl photography or big bird photography people, it definitely helps knowing what they sound like and having a flash, being prepared to find them and knowing where to look. So that's all I can give you guys on that. If I do happen to find one, I'll be thrilled, but I most likely won't. But hope that helps you guys. So to find the Z tree in the morning, especially for sunrise, because it's going to be hard to find because it's going to be so dark when you get here that you might just drive by it instantly. So it's 2.4 miles south from the Pahayokee Trail, as I mentioned earlier in the video. But when it comes to taking photos of the Z tree, one thing you're going to keep in mind is, depending on what season it is, will affect the water level. So most of the time, you're going to get the same shot from about 15 yards away. Unless you have knee-high gaiters, then you can walk into the swamp and kind of take whatever angle you want. But you have about 3 feet of space with an opening, as you can see that other photographers have definitely been here. It's not marked, but some of the things that really define this area is that along the ground, there's like some rock, some shell. Like basically along the road, there's like a little bit of rocks on the side. And then there's going to be these 2 thick palm trees, kind of the short ones that kind of go out wide. And then there's going to be a small opening right before another section of forest. So that's going to be the markings to make sure you can definitely come and find it. And you're going to want to make sure you bring a tripod so you can get that steady sunrise shot. So I'm at the Pahayokee Overlook. I probably pronounced that incorrectly, but just this general setup of the area, it's about a 0.2 mile loop. 0.2 miles is really generous. You could probably walk around this whole thing in 5 minutes. It's a little overlook that overlooks a grassy plain area. So the overlook itself, the part you'll walk up to, faces north. So the thing is, when it comes to taking a photo, it really doesn't matter what time of day, sunrise, sunset, it's the same shot. But the part of the boardwalk that kind of goes along the lower part of the grassy area, it faces east. So if you want to come here for a specific kind of shot, you're going to get a better shot at sunrise or closer to sunrise. Now you might get a cool sunset shot if the colors pop and shoot over, but the sun will be rising along the horizon up the eastward way. So the problem is, I'm lucky right now with the clouds, but if there were no clouds, the sun would be shooting right down at the marsh, and with all the water, you get an intense amount of glare, so you really wouldn't be able to take a photo at all during the midpoint of the day. So this is definitely closer to the beginning of the morning or late afternoon for shots. Trying to take photos here midday would be a nightmare. So this is the Royal Palm area of the Everglades Park. It's the first turnoff off the main road. Now Royal Palm is really just a rest area for people who just need to stop by and see something real quickly. There are some rest stops, there's a small gift shop, but it's nothing special. The two things here to see are the Anaheim Trail and the Gumbo Limbo Trail. Now to just start off, the Anaheim Trail is a nice little introduction to the Everglades. You kind of walk along this open pond area with a bunch of lily pads, a few mangroves. If you are lucky enough, you might see a gator or a turtle or a ton of fish in the channel. As you walk down the trail, eventually it becomes a small little boardwalk that loops around a small area. It's going to be a giant pond with just a million lily pads. Now you could get lucky enough and see a gator swimming through the lily pads. I did see one resting by the other look at area. He's resting on the land, just basically out of the sun because it's midday. But it's kind of a luck of the draw when it comes to the animals you might see at various places. Now this place might get overflowed with tourists because it's the first stop. I'd probably recommend spending 20 to 30 minutes here and then venturing more further down the park. You can walk around the Gumbo Limbo Trail. It's about 0.4 miles long. It's not super interesting. It's very similar to the Mahogany Hammock with just trees and brush kind of encircling you. And it is paved, so you don't have to worry about mud or anything kind of just destroying your footwear. Both of these areas are very tourist friendly, but I would strongly recommend finding other places of the park to go and visit and not spending that much time here. Back to my hotel room in Homestead. I hope you enjoyed me giving some tips and talking about parts of the park while I was in the park. The rest of the things I want to talk about, I either didn't have enough time to, or I wasn't thinking about talking about them because I was in a time crunch or I was too busy taking photographs of the areas. The first place I want to talk about is Shark Valley, and that's what you saw at the very beginning of this. So Shark Valley is a 15-mile loop that basically goes straight into the Everglades, and this place is actually separated from the main road. If you look at the map, it's actually on a separate highway. It's about an hour and a half drive away from the actual main entrance. But the most important thing to know about this area, Shark Valley is a straight shot bike path loop almost. It's a 15-mile round trip, or it's 7 miles halfway to the observation tower. And the thing to note is, it takes about an hour to bike casually to the tower. So when I got there at 2, and then I found out that I needed to return my bike by 5 p.m., I basically booked it to the tower because I was also trying to stop and take photos of all the animals that I saw along this path. And out of all the places in the park, I saw the most alligators here. Now that just might be coincidence. Out of the 7-mile loop, I saw 5 alligators going down one way. So that just might be a coincidence because there are places you can see some of these guys in the actual Everglades Park. But I would say you more commonly will find them resting along the cove in Shark Valley. So to rent a bike in Shark Valley, it's $20 per bike. And these aren't fancy bikes. These are literally cheap, old, rusty bikes that are pedal bikes. So they go at one speed and you brake by backpedaling. So if you can only imagine trying to book it 7 miles in 45 minutes, is very, very exhausting. I would definitely recommend getting to this park earlier than later. So if you're looking for a longer hike to do, you could do the Long Pine Key Trail. It's 6.5 miles one way. So that's 13 in total if you want to do the math, if you want to park at one end and loop all the way back. You most likely could walk a mile or two into this place and then turn around because you most likely will see the whole entire trail in a few miles or so. At one end of the trail, there is a lake, but if you want to see this lake without having to hike a total of 13 miles, there's a second entrance with a half-mile dirt road to this lake, but it's not marked on a map. So you have to drive a few miles down the road, and you'll see a dirt road that just veers off to the left, and it will most likely be blocked off, because it was blocked off when I was there. But this is the other end of the trail, so you can just park along the side of the road, just make sure you're not blocking off the entrance. And then you can just walk the half mile in to check out the lake and then walk back out if you don't want to walk the whole 13 miles. One thing I realized when I got to the park is that a large percentage of the area is only accessed by kayaking and canoe. If you look at the map closely, there looks like there are more trails, but they're in a different shade of color because these are actually kayaking and canoeing trails. Out of all the places to go check out in the park, I would say about 40% of them are only accessed by canoeing and kayaking. Now, there's still plenty to do on foot, but if you're able to bring in your own canoe or kayak, there's a lot more to the Everglades to explore than there is if you're just on your two legs. And if you are bumming that you didn't have a canoe or kayak to rent, if you stay or you're hanging out in the Flamingo area, you can rent a kayak for 2 hours to kayak around the outskirts of the Flamingo area. So this is mainly just for fun. I don't know if there's really any kayaking trails you can go do around this area in that time frame, but if you like just being in a canoe and a kayak out in the open area, this is where you want to go to rent them. Now, how much time would you actually want to spend in the Everglades? I think it kind of depends on what you're looking to go see there. I'd say if you're only on foot, the average tourist can enjoy spending 1 to 2 days along the Everglades National Park. So I'd say you'd spend 1 day up by Shark Valley and Big Cypress exploring that area, and then even maybe taking an airboat ride to go see some of the gators and some of the wildlife and some of the wetlands by via airboat. Those are a lot of fun. I did them as a kid. Then you'd probably spend a second day coasting through the road, stopping off at all the places that don't take a long time to hike or walk around. The second day, basically, you probably stop at the Royal Palm area to check out the Hinga Trail. You drive down, do the small Pinelands loop, continue going down further, walk around the Mahogany Hammock, maybe stop at West Lake afterwards if you have time, and then probably finish your day hanging out in Flamingo. It's a nice area to just enjoy a small snack or a drink looking out onto the water. There's a huge picnic and amphitheater area, so it's going to be no problem at all finding a place to just sit and enjoy the end of your day. So for the photographers, you could spend 3, maybe 4 days going hard in the park. I spent about 4 because I was also trying to get some video of the area too. And we're going to be spending so much more time because we'll be at each location longer than the average tourist and trying to walk a little bit further or a little bit off trail, not a lot off trail, just to get a different look or a different perspective of the actual area. So for your first day, I would definitely recommend exploring the Big Cypress National Preserve in Shark Valley. And then for the next 2 to 3 days, picking your spots along the road that you're going to be wanting to spend more of your time with your mornings, afternoons, and evenings in to get a variety of photos. For sunrise, I recommend the Z tree because it's basically, it faces east, so the best time to get with the sun coming up behind it is in the morning. On another sunrise morning, if you want to do too, I would suggest the Pahayokee Overlook, just because you can use the boardwalk as the foreground as the sun rises up. For sunset, I definitely recommend the Flamingo Prairie Trail walk because the sun sets almost perfectly down the middle of the trail. And you can also find some areas where it's just a tree in kind of this own open field. Or if you're lucky and the weather is just right over the past few days or weeks, You can find these large areas with mud cracks in them, which is what I found, and it just makes for an epic foreground for your sunset. Now for the middle of the day, you're going to be trying to figure out what to do with the sun overhanging above you. Now the one thing to remember is not all of the park is wetlands, so there are sections of the park where it's flat with no water, so you can get some nice large landscape shots without having to worry about the sun reflecting right up off the water and going straight into your camera. You can also try to be looking for different animals along the other paths. Now, for your bird photographers out there, there are so many birds, you can just look up into the sky and it feels like you can see hundreds of them. You're going to want a very narrow lens or lens that can see a long distance. You're going to be wanting to get at least a 150 to 600 millimeter lens just to make sure you can try to get up close and personal with these birds. Because even though I could get close with my 70 to 200, a lot of the birds out there either fly too far away or they're too high up in the air, where even though I'm all the way maxed out at 200 millimeters, the bird just looks like a dot on my sensor. So you really want to try to rock a 150 to 600 millimeter lens if you can, or you're just going to have to get lucky with a 70 to 200 that the bird flies right in front of your face. Now for some photography specific advice, you're always going to want your tripod, which is what my camera is sitting on right now, and then some of the extra pieces of glass that you're going to want. Polarizer helps a lot with the glare from the sun and just kind of boosting the natural colors of the environment. An ND filter, especially for sunrise or sunset if you're trying to get the clouds dragging, or you want an ND filter if you're trying to make a video or a vlog in the park, just to make sure you can go down to 2.8 without having the exposure be way too high and blown out. But this right here, this little bottle of cloth, I think are the most important things you could bring with you as a photographer to the Everglades. And it's a microfiber cloth and a lens cleaning kit. So why are these important? It's because of this. So you're going to be in the national park in Florida where there's a lot of bugs and a lot of sun. So not only are you going to be sweating, you're going to be covered in sunscreen and you're going to be covered in bug spray. So that's 3 layers of grease that if you accidentally touch your camera lens, you're going to leave a nasty fingerprint and you don't want those in your shot. So having a lens cleaning kit for just in case if I accidentally touch my lens so I can clean it off, no problem, is extremely vital to keeping your camera clean and making sure you can get crisp shots without any debris in the way. So for a price breakdown, I spent about 4 days going hard in the Everglades National Park, so I'm going to map it off of that. So I just want to start off with my flight because flights will vary depending on where in the world you're flying from. So flying from Boston, my flight round trip was $195. To rent a rental car for 4 days, plus what I paid in gas, was $235. For 4 days at the Garden Inn in Homestead, was $65 a day, so I ended up paying about $260 for the 4 days. When it came to food, I spent about probably $10 to $15 to maybe $20 a day because my lunch and breakfast was a Cliff Bar or Pop-Tarts because I was just trying to make sure I'd have enough to eat in the morning to make sure I was out shooting. And then I'd come home and grab like McDonald's or Popeyes for dinner, which is like $7 to $15 depending on how hungry you are. So out of 4 days, I spent about $80 on food. And just depending on your appetite, you might be spending even more or even less, but that's totally just dependent on you. The park pass to get into the national park for 7 days was $30. To rent a bike was $20. Now, if I wanted to rent a kayak for 2 hours in Flamingo, it was $25, but I chose not to because I wanted to focus on sunrise shots. So my grand total is around $820. Depending on the activities you're going to want to be doing or the things that you could be doing on top of what you could do on foot in the national park, you might be paying a little bit more, or you might be paying a lot less if you're not spending as much time in the national park as I am. So then you'd be cutting back on your food, rental car, and accommodation prices. So $820 is a good average for 4 days. If you're spending less time in the park, you're probably going to be saving maybe like $1 to $2 extra $100 just on time commitment things. So if you enjoyed those few tips and advice on the Everglades National Park, they're the things that I thought would be super helpful if I was going to tell my past self what I'd want to know going into the park as well. If you want to know something specific, maybe about one of my shots or locations or somewhere where to get, or for just a random question you might have about the park that I could potentially answer for you, I'll leave them down below. So if you work for the Everglades or the national parks in general and you like this video and you want to sponsor me to come to your location or back to the Everglades to help take photos or make videos or just increase the general attraction of what you're building or working on, I'd love to. Just send me a note, slide into my DM, send me an email, or shoot me a message, or leave in the comment section below as well with the other questions or comments that the other viewers might have. I'd love to just travel and work for the national parks as a photographer. So if you have a salary burning a hole in your pocket and you need photos, I would love to volunteer myself. But as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope if you found it helpful. And as always, let's recap.